Okay, we're getting into the respiratory system. So we're looking at respiration. So when we're going through this chapter, we are going to be doing a lot of identification. So we need to know all of our structures. Um, and then we're also going to kind of play that game, whereas you're air, right? You're a molecule of air, and let's see how it flows through the body, just like we did with the cardiovascular and the vessels, following blood through all of those vessels, getting from point A to point B. Making sure that we're being as specific as possible, labeling all of the structures that the air or blood passes through. Now, in your pre-lab, lab 11, it's the last question. It kind of asks you to do this and number a bunch of different structures in how you as an oxygen molecule would be moving through the body. Okay, so if you want just kind of practice with that, you can of course use the lab manual, but we'll also be doing it in this lecture. So, just basic functions of the respiratory system as a whole. The main one is to supply blood with oxygen and then remove carbon dioxide. Okay, that whole gas exchange that we've been kind of alluding to going through the cardiovascular system, oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood, that's where this system kind of corresponds and parallels the cardiovascular. Okay, but it also is going to help filter incoming air, right? Getting rid of bacteria, pathogens, dust, anything really that could be harmful, that doesn't belong, that is non-self. The respiratory system can get rid of it, or at least majority of it. And it's also going to maintain your blood pH. So, carbon dioxide is considered a volatile acid. So, by removing carbon dioxide, we're actually maintaining homeostasis within the blood in terms of your pH levels. Also, maintaining homeostasis with the respiratory system, it's going to help, control fluid and thermal homeostasis, right? Making sure that your body temperature is regulated. Also, your kind of like a secondary function, kind of your vocal cords, your voice box, if you will, is located in the respiratory system. So the system also helps produce sound out of our mouth. It also helps us smell. So olfaction, that function also is occurring here in the respiratory system. And we also have Valsalva maneuvers. Okay, Valsalva maneuvers is this cool thing. So I'm sure you all have done this before in one way or another, but maybe just never had the name of it. Okay, so it's basically if you were to take a deep breath right now, breathe in, but then plug your nose and then not open your mouth. Okay, so nose and mouth are closed, but you just inhaled, and now you're going to forcibly exhale. And so you have this whole, lots of pressure building up within your body. You may have done it to, if you're constipated to try and get the poop out, right? You're going to have Valsalva maneuvers where you're tensed and you're pushing, 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 right? Um, or blowing up a balloon, or maybe you're doing some squats and you're trying to push back upright, and that weight is really, really heavy, and your mouth is closed and you're not really breathing. You're just having all this built up pressure within your body to kind of exert force to get that bar back up on the rack. But anyway, so that's Valsalva maneuvers. So that also is just kind of like a secondary function of the respiratory system. Okay, so respiration, the process of respiration occurs in 4 steps. Three, but we can break it down into 4. Okay. So on your image here, it's only labeled 1, 2, and 3, but I'll show you where the 4th one is. Okay. So the first thing is pulmonary ventilation. Remember, when we're talking about pulmonary, we know that we're going to be dealing with the lungs. So this is breathing. Okay. We have inhalation, which is going to be an inflow, and then we have exhalation, which is going to be an outflow of air. Okay. And so we have this exchange of air between, the atmosphere and then structures called the alveoli of the lungs. And so we're basically allowing oxygen to enter the lungs. And then with exhalation, we have carbon dioxide leaving the lungs. Okay, so that's pulmonary ventilation. And you can see that up here. We can see carbon dioxide leaving as we exhale and oxygen coming in as we inhale. Fantastic. The next one is external respiration, which is sometimes also called pulmonary respiration, because we still are dealing with the lungs. However, we're now having an exchange of gases between those alveoli of the lungs, but now the blood in the pulmonary capillaries. Okay, so it almost makes more sense to call it pulmonary respiration. But we can see, okay, now we're interacting with that pulmonary circuit. So we have those pulmonary capillaries, right? Because remember, it's not the veins or the arteries where things are actually moving in and out of the vessels, it's the capillaries. So external respiration, pulmonary respiration, we have oxygen moving into the capillaries, we have carbon dioxide leaving the capillaries. Okay, and it all is happening in these structures called alveoli of the lungs, which we'll introduce later. Okay, and then step 3, which isn't necessarily labeled as step 3 on your image, but it could be. This is really just the transport of gases. Okay, so this is gases actually moving through the blood. Okay, so we can see we are transporting oxygen where it's red, right? Because red denotes oxygenated blood, and blue denotes deoxygenated blood, implying that there is carbon dioxide. Okay, so that would be technically step 3, but on your image, step 3, the last step of respiration, is internal respiration, which we could also call tissue respiration. I almost like to refer to it as tissue respiration more so because well, you'll see. Okay, so with this internal respiration, we have exchange of gases between those systemic capillaries, right? Because now we're in the systemic circuit. We're not dealing with the lungs anymore. So we have systemic capillaries and the tissue cells. So oxygen's going to leave the systemic capillaries and go into these cells where it's needed, and then carbon dioxide is now considered a waste product of those metabolic reactions occurring in the cell, and it's going to enter those systemic capillaries and then be transported through venous the venous drainage system. Okay, so the cells doing that metabolic reaction, that's technically, going to be called cellular respiration, which hopefully you remember from your gen bios, where we're actually creating energy, but as a byproduct of that, it's not just ATP that's created, it's also water molecules and carbon dioxide. So that's where we get carbon dioxide from. Okay, cool. So those are our 4 steps of respiration. So we're going to be talking about those, but just a little bit more detail and understanding the actual players of how, we get air to this point. Okay. So before we talk about structures, last thing for this video is just going over the functional classifications of the respiratory system. So we have the conducting zone. The purpose of the conducting zone is essentially going to be filtering the air that comes in, moistening the air that comes in, and then conducting the air from the atmosphere and all the way into the lungs. Okay, and so we'll talk about what structures are involved with the conducting zone, but that is the job. All right, it has nothing to do with gas exchange. The second functional classification is the respiratory zone, and that's where we have that main purpose of the respiratory system of, gas exchange. Okay, so the respiratory zone is going to have all these tubes and tissues within lungs where gas exchange actually occurs. All right, and again, there are specific structures for each of these zones, and we will talk about that momentarily.